Hi everyone. Today is lesson 98, solving quadratic equations by factoring. Let's get started. Example 1, using the zero product property. First, we need to know what the zero product property says. On the screen, it says that the product of two, if the product of two quantities equals zero, at least one of the quantities must equal zero. So what that is telling you is in order to get zero, when you're multiplying, one of the factors has to be equal to zero. So here they give you two binomials, x minus 4 and x plus 5. They're asking you what possible x values can you have that will make this equation equal to zero. And so here you can see they made both binomials equal to zero. So x minus 4 equals 0 and x plus 5 equals 0. And then they solve for x. So x here can equal 4, and here x can equal a negative 5. And down below, they use that to check their answer to make sure that one of the binomials equals 0. Then you multiply anything by 0, your answer is 0. So here you can see that they did that. Both sides does equal 0. Therefore, the solution set to that equation is negative 5 and 4. So let's look at an example. X minus 3 times x minus 8 equals 0. I need to set both of those binomials equal to 0. So x minus 3 equals 0 and x minus 8 equals 0. And then we use what we did before earlier in the year, the golden rule of algebra. Whatever I do on one side, I must do on the other. So in order to get x by itself, I add 3 to both sides. When I do that here, x can equal a positive 3. Now on the right-hand side, if I add 8 to both sides, I have x equals a positive 8. And I can check mentally by plugging 3 in for x. 3 minus 3 is 0. 3 minus 8 is negative 5. 0 times a negative 5 is 0. So I know 3 can be one of my answers. If I put 8 in, 8 minus 3 is 5. 8 minus 8 is 0. 5 times 0 is 0. Therefore, 3 and 8 are my possible solutions. You may do the one on the right yourself. Example 2, solve quadratic equations by factoring. Before, when we are making something equal to 0, especially the two binomials, you factored a trinomial to get those two binomials. What you're really finding are the roots of an equation. And the roots of an equation are the solutions to an equation, which are also known as your x-intercepts or your zeros. You already had found x-intercepts earlier in the year and the zeros. So where does if you were to graph them, where do they cross the x-axis? So in order to solve these problems, we're going to find the roots. Means we're going to find the x-intercepts or the zeros. So to do that, we need to make the equation equal to 0, and then we factor. So let's take the first example here. X squared plus 2x equals 8. In order to make this equal to 0, I need to get rid of this 8. To get rid of that 8, I subtract 8 on both sides. And when I do that, I end up with x squared plus 2x minus 8 equals 0. Now I can factor my trinomial. What do I multiply to get negative 8, but add them together gives me a positive 2. Well, I know I can multiply a negative 2 times a positive 4. That gives me a negative 8. And negative 2 plus 4 gives me a positive 2. So now I just have to make sure that each binomial is equal to 0. and I solve. So x minus 2 equals 0. I add 2 to both sides. So x can equal positive 2. And over here, x plus 4 equals 0. I subtract 4 on both sides, and x can equal a negative 4. So my solution set would be 2 and negative 4. Let's try the one on the right-hand side. Here, in order to get this equal to 0, I need to subtract 19x on both sides. So now I have 7x squared minus 19x minus 6 equals 0. Now, there's not a factor I can take out of 7, 19, and 6 besides 1. Now I have to factor this going the longer route. So I multiply 7 times negative 6, which is a negative 42x squared. What do I multiply negative 42x squared by? To get negative 19x. I can multiply this by, this would be a negative 21x and a positive 2x. And I bring down the outer 2. So here's your 7x squared. Here's your minus 7, or minus 6. Now I just factor. I can take a 7x out of 7x squared and 21x. That leaves me with x minus 3. Over here, I can take a 2 out. That leaves me with x minus 3. So when I factor that, put my binomials together, I have x minus 3 in my answer, and I have 7x plus 2. And these both have to equal 0. So now, to find out what x could possibly be, I add 3 to both sides. So here, x can equal positive 3. On this side, can subtract 2 on both sides, and then divide by 7 on both sides. So here, x can equal a negative 2/7. So my solution would be 3, negative 2/7. Each of those x values would make that quadratic equal to 0. You may work on these other two yourself if you need extra practice. Example 3, find the roots by factoring out the greatest common factor. We're going to do the exact same thing. The only difference is we're going to factor out the greatest common factor first. So here, I need to write this trinomial so it's equal to 0. In order to do this, let's just bring everything to the right. So I need to subtract 20, and I need to add 2x squared to both sides. So now I have 0 equals, I'm going to put my 2x squared first, and then I have minus 20x, and then I have plus 50. So now if I look here at my trinomial, I know that the biggest number I can take out of all of them is a 2. So if I take a 2 out, that leaves me with x squared minus 10x plus 25. And then I need to factor that trinomial. So I have 0 equals 2. What do I multiply to get 25? Add them together gives me a negative 10. That's a perfect square trinomial. So this would be a minus 5 and a minus 5. Now, since I have two binomials that are identical, I only need to find the x value for one of them. So I make each factor equal to 0. Well, I know 2 can't equal 0, so I don't have to worry about the 2. I just have to make x minus 5 equal to 0. So to get x by itself, I add 5 to both sides. X will equal a positive 5. This is my only solution for this particular trinomial. Let's try the next one. 5x squared minus 20x equals 10x minus 45. Again, I have to make that equal to 0. So I'm going to subtract 10x and add 45 to both sides. Subtract 10x and add 45 to both sides. I end up with 5x squared minus 30x plus 45 equals 0. Now, if I look at my trinomial, I know I can take a 5 out of all three terms. That leaves me with x squared minus 6x plus 9. And this all has to equal 0. Now, whatever x has to be for this parentheses to be 0. Anything 5 times 0 is going to be 0. So I just need to find out what does x have to possibly be for that whole thing to be equal to 0. So I need to factor that trinomial. So what do I multiply to get a positive 9? But add them together gives me a negative 6, negative 3, and a negative 3. Again, that's a perfect square trinomial. So I have two binomials that are the same. So I just need to make one of them equal to 0. So I need to add 3 to both sides. X equals a positive 3. So when x equals a positive 3, this whole thing is going to be equal to 0. Example 4a, the application. The area of a rectangular garden is 51 square yards. The length is 14 yards more than the width. What are the length and width of the garden? So first off, I need to know the formula to find area of a rectangle. I know that length times width equals the area. And now I'm just going to substitute the information they give me in the problem into that formula. So they told me that the area was 51 square yards. So I'm going to put 51 in for the area. And they said that the length, so the length is 14 yards more than the width. So the width plus 14. And then I have the width is just W. Now if I plug this in for the length over here, now I have W plus 14, and then W in for the width times W. I can now solve for the width. So now if I do that, I have to distribute the W. So now I have W squared plus 14W equals 51. Now in order to do this, like we did before, I need to make this equal to 0. So if I subtract 51 on both sides, now I have W squared plus 14W equals, or minus 51 equals 0. Now all I need to do is now multiply or factor that trinomial. So I'm going to put that up here. So what do I multiply to get negative 51? But when I add them together, it gives me a positive 14. So I'll think about that for a moment. Well, I know 17 times 3 gives me 51. So if I need to make that when you add those two numbers together, 17 and 3, they have to give me 14, positive 14. So I know it's a positive 17 and a negative 3. So now I just need to make both of them equal to 0. So for this first part, to solve for W, I add 3 to both sides. So the width can equal a positive 3. If I subtract 17 on both sides here, the width will equal a negative 17. You cannot have a length that's a negative number. So I know this is not the solution. So I know the width is 3. Now I need to substitute 3 into this equation here to find my width, or find my length. So if I put 3 in there, that will give me my length. So 3 plus 14, the length will have to equal 17. So these are going to be 17 and 3 yards. Those would be my dimensions of the garden. You may work on example 4B if you need to see another one, or work on another one yourself. Otherwise, we'll move on to example 5A. Solve quadratic equations with missing terms. So again, just like we were doing, making the equation equal to 0, factor the equation, and then make each factor equal to 0 and find the zeros. So the first one over here, 18x squared equals 8x. I need to get everything to one side. So I'm going to subtract 8x on both sides. So now I have 18x squared minus 8x equals 0. I can factor out that equation. So I can take out a 2x, that's the biggest factor of 18 and 2. So if I take a 2x out of 18x squared, that gives me 9x. 8x divided by 2x gives me a negative 4. This equals 0. Remember, all I need to do is make both factors equal to 0. So if I do that, 2x equals 0. Get x by itself, I divide by 2. X equals 0. Over here, 9x minus 4 equals 0. To get x by itself, I add 4 to both sides. So 9x equals 4. Divide by 9 on both sides. X equals positive 4/9. So the solution set to this one, x can be 0, and it can also be 4/9. Let's do one more, and then you can do the next one yourself. So 4x squared minus 25 equals 0. Since it's already equal to 0, I can now look at what do I have in common with 4x squared and 25. There is no common factor, but I do know that 4x squared is a perfect square and 25 is a perfect square. And since I'm subtracting the two, it's a difference of 2 squares. So if it's a difference of 2 squares, I know that one's positive and one's going to be negative. So the square root of 4x squared is 2x. Square root of 25 is 5. So I have two binomials, 2x minus 5 and 2x plus 5. Both of them have to equal 0. So now 2x minus 5 equals 0. I add 5 to both sides. 2x equals 5. Get x by itself by dividing by 2. X can equal 5/2. Over here, get x by itself, I have 2x plus 5 equals 0. I subtract 5 on both sides. 2x equals a negative 5. Divide by 2 on both sides. X will equal a negative 5 halves. So these two x values would be my solution. Now I want you to try the one on the right yourself. Your assignment for next time is lesson 98, number 7, 10 to 15, 18, 23, and 24.